We're going where you want to go so you can be where you need to be. It's Road Gang Radio with Lindsay, Lawler, and Jimmy Mack on RadioNemo.com.
Once in a while, I do talk to the person I'm married to over in California.
Well, that's nice.
One of the big surprises, and Tara noticed this at the party we had here at the Fastport Studios. At some point, we all had that meeting. Lindsay and Claire reached over and began to kind of massage my shoulders, and I just put my head down on the table because I was so tired. And it was funny because Tara went, "That's really odd." No, wait, that's not odd at all.
Like, they're married. This is not an HR problem.
Yeah,
Got
and this
it.
is and oh, they like each other. I forget that too. So we were talking just the other day about our next guest, and I just said, I got to tell you, Claire, you hit the ball out of the park with this one. I mean, this is a talented human being. This is a talented human being, and I got to tell you, I think Lindsay's really going to love this work. And she goes, Jimmy, who do you think picked her?
Jimmy.
And I'm like, you're my spirit animal. You got it. I mean, it's just like, this is like maybe the perfect combination guest for everything that both you and I dig. And you found somebody who hits the absolute sweet spot of the twixt and tween. Our next guest is an incredibly talented human being. And since you are, in fact, the person who decided to get them on, I thought you should do the honors of introducing them.
Well, thank you so much. But, dude, yes, but tarot and tabletop gaming. If you and I had a baby, it would be our next guest. I mean, come on. Our next guest is the wildly talented, and by the way, check this name out, Fen Inkwright, if that is in fact your name. How cool is that? An illustrator, a writer, a folklorist whose work lives right at the intersection of art, tarot, and storytelling. Boom, let's go. Her creations, they feel like stepping into another world. If you see them and when you see them, please go to the website. It's so beautiful. You step into this other world that's rooted, pun intended, in nature and folklore, but with this quiet otherworldly pull about it, which reminds us, Jim, that there is, in fact, magic all around us, but we just got to slow down enough to see it. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, guys. So from her stunning card deck, and we'll unpack exactly what that is, by the way, and how it can pertain to you, called Seed and Sickle, to her folklore-inspired artwork, to her children's illustrations. Fen really explores these stories that live in the land and that live inside of us, is what I kind of got from this all. So we're going to dive deep. We're going to get magical. Please make welcome to the show our new friend, soon to be yours, Fen Inkwright. Good morning.
Good morning and good afternoon.
Oh, and good afternoon. Yes, you are.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're happy to. I'm going to start super basic, if that's okay, Fen. Is Fen Inkwright your birth name, by the way?
It is not. No.
Yeah, I know. I figured that.
No, my birth name is very common, and as anyone who has a creative job knows, you have to hit that Google search engine optimization. So I changed it when I could.
Well, Fen, you were anything
exactly,
but common or normal. So glad that you found a cool way to represent that. So I would love to start with the basics here. I'm looking at several decks over on my wall to the left. This is something that I love. I love using it as a divination tool and just talking to spirit. But if you could start with the basics here, unpack your world a little bit. But for those who might think, as far as it goes, that say tarot is just fortune telling or whatnot, how would you describe what tarot and specifically how it works in your world is, and how you personally use it?
Sure. So just to clarify, my decks are oracle decks rather than tarot decks. So for anyone who is a little unfamiliar with the terminology, tarot decks are always the same as in the cards, have the same meanings, the same symbology all of the time, whereas oracle decks are kind of designed and written by the creator. So for me, they feel a little bit more flexible and kind of allow us to ask questions that we might not be asking, consider answers that we might not answer otherwise. And so the two oracle decks that I've created, they're both quite different, as you may know. One of them, the Seed and Sickle, is very much based on plants and the natural world around us. And my other deck, the Citadel deck, is more of a sort of a storytelling, fantasy-inspired deck. And so for me, they are just a different way to tell stories and explore our own stories as well in a way that for me feels very natural.
Well, and I just want to say real quick, sorry, Jim, and because there's also gaming here. There's a lot that plays into will speak to everybody listening. But Jim, I said Tara, actually, all my decks as well, including yours that I'm ordering, Finn, are Oracle, and because the tarot overwhelms me, to be quite honest. But the Oracle, for me, the decks are beautiful. I'll walk into a store and just pick one that speaks to me at the time, and basically it's a deck of cards that they all have a saying on them, and then there's a complimentary book that goes along with it. And I personally, I'll say a prayer. I use it to talk to God or listen to God rather. I will say a prayer, and then I'll pull a card and say, what message would you have me know? That's how I use it, and then go through the book to see what the message is trying to tell me. It can be a moment of presence, of gratitude, of prayer, of meditation, however you want to look at it. It's way less fortune telling and woo woo than it's pretty woo woo, but it's way less out there than it doesn't have to be so out there is what I'm trying to say, Jim. You understand what I'm trying to say. It can be used as just an everyday uplifting tool. Jim. Right?
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to kind of go off of that is the fact that what you're really engaged in here, and if you guys go over to the website, what you'll notice is that there's world building going on, and I mean that from both a role playing game kind of place, but also from an overall oeuvre. What you're kind of crafted here, what you've kind of put together here, is a different filter of a way of looking at the natural world and finding the stories in it. And I was kind of curious to ask if you set out to build the world that you built, or if in fact you planted a seed and then began to realize it was taking you in different directions. And I know that's a very broad question, but was there an intent at the beginning to kind of build a world, or did it just begin with a few little things that you were working on and then you began to realize it was spreading? Am I making sense when I ask that question?
Yes, you are. I have to just clarify, though, is this in regard to the Citadel deck, as you're mentioning world building, or are you on about the Seed and Sickle?
No, I'm in regards to the whole project. I mean, the whole thing of your work. I mean, I'm kind of curious as to where you kind of began and to realize where things were taking you. That's why it's such a broad question. You follow me now? The idea that something has kind of come to life from little tiny bits and pieces have suddenly become this kind of, the roots and vines have spread everywhere. It's a British garden in the sense that it's like it's curated, but it's also overgrown.
Yeah, overgrown is a perfect descriptor of my mind and my life in general. There are so many things in the world that just fascinate me. And I think that a lot of my work started quite a long time ago when I was living in Cambridge at the time. And I was really kind of doing a lot of research into how we historically used to use plants in medicine and as foodstuffs and to make fabric and our houses, and all the ways that the natural world had really kind of helped us to develop as a civilization. And from then you realize that there is a lot of, magical connections to plants. There's plants that are connected to ancient spiritual practices and gods and magic and folklore. And there are just these wonderful stories that develop from what seems very mundane to us and what seems very everyday. And so I started kind of writing a few little stories or kind of a few little books that would basically allow people to look at the plants that we see just in the hedgerows and in the gardens that we think are weeds, and to kind of say, well, hey, actually that weed is here because the Romans found it really useful when they were on campaign, so they carried it to this country, and that's how it came over here. And suddenly you realize there's this wonderful history and wonderful background behind the things that we take for granted, or the things that we don't even like because we're like, oh, I'm always having to pull that out of my garden. It always grows over everything. And you don't realize just how much is behind it. And then sort of from there, I just got interested in folklore in general and history and stories. And there's just so much wonderful things to learn about in this world in terms of how humanity has taken the mundane and turned it into something fantastical. And I think that's really where it all comes from. Is I just love learning those stories and retelling them in a way that makes them acceptable or interesting to us nowadays, where we've become so separated from nature. We live our lives. We wake up, we get into our car, we drive to an office, we sit in our office all day. There's none of the connection to nature that we used to have every single day in our lives. And so for me, it's just a wonderful way to bring that back into our lives now in a way that feels very timely, I think.
Finn, you just hit, for me, the nail on the head by saying that humanity has taken something so mundane and try to make it this mystical, magical thing, which it is, by the way, but we've overthought it. It made me think of, Jim, we just had on someone from the Salem Witch Museum a couple days ago, and it kind of plays into that, why people have taken folklore, anything mystical, obviously the witchy side of things, and tried to make it something negative, or you don't know what you're talking about. It's like what you were talking about, Finn, is the most basic of anything. It's animals and plants and nature and everything just living outside your door. So with that, your work ties so much into plants and folklore. Can you just actually, again, for maybe our audience who this is a little outside of their wheelhouse, just sort of break down what folklore means to you? What is your sort of definition of folklore, and why do plants and old stories matter so much in our modern lives?
So I'm going to try and remember this quote that has always stuck with me, because I think it was a really wonderful summary that basically said that to understand a people entirely, you must first understand or listen to their folklore. And basically, to me, so you break it down into two parts, folk, people, and lore, stories. It's people stories. I think folklore has become a very broad concept nowadays, and it can be applied to many things, not least, Google folklore and you'll end up with a Taylor Swift album. It can mean all manner of things. But really at the heart of it, it is the stories of people. And historically, hundreds of years back, thousands of years back, we didn't have the same understanding of the world that we have now. So we didn't have science. We didn't have medicine. We didn't have mathematics in the same way. So people would tell stories to pass on the knowledge that they had. So they would say, well, actually, that plant is protected by this god, so you shouldn't pick it and you shouldn't eat it. And really that was their way of saying, this is poisonous, or this will upset the ecosystem in a way that we don't fully understand, but we do know that when we have done this historically, it has caused trouble in some way. And, you have for example, in Germany, there are these wonderful creatures known as Feldgeister, so the field ghosts or field spirits. And they have all manner of names. You've got one that lurks in the wheat, one that lurks in the farm, one that lurks in the barnyards. And they would tell these stories about how to treat them, how to respect them, how not to upset them. And really, it was just a warning about, well, don't go into the wheat because there could be ticks and then you'll get sick. Or, don't do this in the barn because actually this will upset the harvest. And so it's just a way that we would tell our stories and tell the knowledge that we had when we didn't have the full understanding that we obviously have nowadays to explain what happens. And I just think that's beautiful, how it's still the concept of passing on knowledge that is very valuable, but it turned it into something beautiful and fantastical. And to me, that is folklore. It is just people's stories and what they tell about us. I think, you have there's a beautiful story from Cambridge about this creature that was known as the Tiddymun. And he was meant to be this protective spirit within the marshlands, within the swamps. And he was always very protective. He would warn people when floods were coming. He would warn them when the waters were high. And then when in the 17th century, the Dutch came and said that they were going to drain the fens to make it a more buildable land, suddenly all the stories of the Tiddymun, he became this very angry spirit who would send floods to kill people, and he would lead people astray. And those changing stories reflect how the people at the time were angry at the Dutch for taking their livelihoods and, you know, taking away the fens that they relied on for travel and for fishing. And I think that's what it is at the heart of it. It tells a very specific snapshot of time and people's emotions and what was important to them. And I think that's, you know, as you can tell, I will go on and ramble about this all day. But
no,
that,
it's
to me,
beautiful.
is the heart of folklore.
That was beautiful. Thank you for that.
One of the things that I really will encourage people to check out this work as well is that, you know, a good friend of mine actually made a really terrific folk horror movie called The Ritual, David Bruckner. One of the things, though, that I love about this, as opposed to a lot of what is now considered folk horror, some of it's incredibly well made. You know, I mean, going back to The Wicker Man and before that, one of the things that you do in this work, though, as dangerous as some of this work is that you really kind of make sure that the playfulness of folk horror, that the fairies and the cunning man and all of those characters, that we forget that it's seductive, that there is a playfulness and a kind of joy that goes into it, because that becomes almost sort of a trap, that if we're not careful, we can lose ourselves in dangerous places. That the lore of nature, the reason why people end up in folk horror is because they are lured in either to exploit what they think is beautiful or because they are seduced by something that's beautiful. Can you talk about the juxtaposition of what is lovely? Because there's some things in these books that are just beautiful to look at, and then you realize if I got too close to that thing, it would tear me apart. And to kind of talk about the idea that I think a lot of folk horror often doesn't have that sort of joyful playfulness that then turns and twists.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it depends on, I think, what stories you're looking at and when they've been told and the places that they have been told. And, you know, you do get this period where a lot of folklore, sort of in a more modern period, becomes more playful. You know, you had in the sort of the late 1800s, early 1900s, there's this creature that started appearing in the Lake District called the Tizzy Wizzy. And it's this cute little creature. It's got the body of a hedgehog and the wings of a dragonfly and the tail of a squirrel and the antenna of a bumblebee. And it basically came about because there was an increase of tourists to the area. And the boatmen on the lake were trying to find a way to monetize that. They were like, how do we get people to want to come out on the lake to give us their money? So they came up with this creature that they're like, oh, it's so fast, you know, you're probably not going to see it. It's a really good underwater swimmer. But if you get on my boat, I can take you out to the islands where we might be able to see this thing. And it kind of became like a little in-joke. But now if you read about the Tizzy Wizzy, people still talk about it as if it's a real creature. The same with lumberjack folklore over in the Americas where you are. You had, a period where you'd have these very experienced lumberjacks who would be taking on apprentices, and they would freely admit that they came up with creatures just to scare the apprentices, for a little bit of fun. You know, you had the hide behind that was this tall, spindly creature that, you know, when you were relieving yourself against a tree, it would wrap its arms around and like grab you. And there's such a sense of horror, but also kind of playfulness in the knowledge that they kind of know that it was something being made up. But again, over the years, it's become real. And I think there is always a joy in nature. You know, we go out in nature when we have a day off. We'll go out and go for a walk, and we'll be like, oh, I forgot how beautiful this is. I forgot how lovely the fresh air and how beautiful the sun. And then if you stay a little bit too long in the forest and suddenly it starts getting dark, you're like, oh, it's not fun anymore, actually. I feel a little vulnerable. I feel like, is there something behind me? And I feel like, you know, humans, we've been apex predators for millennia. And so there's not very much that can scare us nowadays. And I think we get used to being like, oh, well, you know, I can go out. I'm going to be safe. And then every now and again, nature still reminds us like, oh, no, I can send a little cold chill down your spine. I can remind you that you don't know what is in this forest. And in many ways, I think we thrill at that because we're like, oh, it's been a long time since I felt scared. That's quite nice. You know, I think that's why we watch horror movies and all of that. But you're right when you mentioned the movie The Ritual and The Wicker Man. I think that there is a very special place in my heart and a lot of people's hearts for folk horror, because it is horror, but it is horror in a way that very much taps into our psyche and our history, where we're like, half of us wants to be going out and doing those things, and the other half is like, oh, no, that scares me a little.
But how you explain it actually makes it makes the balance of it make sense to me, and makes me, if you remember that everything's rooted in nature and play, it's like, oh, then I can get on board with some of the spookier stuff because I have respect for it, quite frankly, and know that it's not. If I don't disrupt you, you won't disrupt me. It's not, it's not rooted in, it's not out to get me unless I'm out to get it. That's kind of what I take away from what you said, which I think is beautiful. All right, we got to pivot here, Jem.
Pivot.
And talk about gaming, because we have got a lot of gamers that listen to the show, and Jim is a big gamer himself, both in video game and board games and everything in between. So you've worked in tabletop gaming, which is such a creative space, and I'm wondering how the mystical and fantasy worlds and gaming overlap for you. Is it about the imagination, about finding meaning in play? How do your worlds come together as far as it pertains to gaming?
Oh, they absolutely overlap in every way. So I am, as you've mentioned, I'm a creative, and I think with everyone who works in the creative industry, we have to pick up a lot of little jobs just to pay the bills. So you end up being an illustrator and a writer and tarot and tabletops, and for me that works very well because my brain is always in a million places, so I can kind of be gathering information and ideas for everything as I go. And so I run a small press gaming publishing company called Crow and Crown, and through that I write books for tabletop gaming. And as with my interest in history and folklore, everything that I write is inspired by my real world research. So everything that I research academically for the books that I write then gets converted into tabletop games and written in the books that I then publish. And I always try and put like a glossary at the back that describes, where each story comes from. So, that little adventure you played, that was like a myth from a local tiny Welsh village. Or, that creature you encountered, that was a folkloric creature from South America. And my hope through that is that not only do people get to play with things that do feel like these really realistic and wild kind of challenges within games, but I hope it also then inspires people to think, oh, well, I didn't realize that story was from actually my hometown, or I visited there once on a holiday, and then it gets them interested in the history and interested in the stories. So it's a little self-indulgent on my behalf, I think, but I think there is such a desire for those kind of stories. And so many people nowadays that do play tabletop games in so many ways. There's been a real resurgence of people interested. And so it's really nice to be able to take the stories that I know and that I love and share them in a way where people aren't just reading a book and saying, oh, that was a nice story, but they're actually playing them in a game and involving themselves in it in a really deep and connected way. And I think that's a really special way to rediscover old histories as well.
I wanted to kind of make a connection to a previous guest we have. You are the second person this month that we've had on that is a game creator, along with, like I said, you are so much more than that. But Fen Inkwright joins us this morning. We had a Joey Royale came on talking about his book, The Weird Heroes of Public Access Television. You could not ask for a more kind of opposite approach to things in regard to this. And Lindsay actually asked because she wanted to get into this stuff and have friends over and maybe start her own adventure. And I realized this only in kind of going back through your website, Lindsay, if you ever wanted to run a game, it's being a tarot card reader. I realized that a dungeon master, that anybody who is doing this has to be able to kind of look at the images and look at the world that is unfolding each step, like each card, and be able to see what is not there and explicate it to the people in the room as you make your way through these kind of creative worlds. It's not the same thing. I realize that, as somebody who actually enjoys both. But there is a connection there to the idea of, rather than kind of planning everything out to the nth degree, to letting the cards or the story unfold and become, and to let the people at the table be the last part of the process to make the world come alive. That's the connection, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and it's interesting that you do make that connection, because I have seen several creators within the tabletop gaming world actually making games that use the tarot. So perhaps your decisions are kind of being made by drawing the cards, or I've seen some where they've turned the cards into characters as well that you can play. And I think a lot of it is storytelling. Even if you were just a tarot reader and you're not really into tabletop gaming or anything, I think when you have a deck and you get very familiar with the deck, some of the cards start to tell their own stories. So maybe when you're kind of thinking about one specific person, this one card keeps turning up. So in your head, that card kind of becomes that person. And when you're in a certain situation, perhaps one suit turns up all the time. So you start associating that suit with something else. And in a way, in your head, you are building your own world. You're taking something that's been given to you as a complete product, but then you're turning it in a completely different way to something that is very personal to you. And I think that every human being is a storyteller at heart. Whatever we do, we're just telling stories. And I think, whether you are into gaming, whether you are into tarot, whatever it is you're into, our brains will always make those little connections that then start creating characters and situations and stories that make sense to us.
I want to know what a gathering at Fen's house looks like, because there's the saying where a carpenter's house is falling apart. So are your gatherings super boring because you don't want to work when people are over, or are they very? If you were to host a gathering, is it very magical and mystical? What does that look like?
It's very loud and very fascinating. A lot of my friends, the majority of my friends, we're all creatives in different ways. And, I have one friend who is incredibly into designing books. And I have one friend who is incredibly into insects. And I have one friend who is incredibly into weaponry from a very specific era. And so when we're talking, we bounce between these subjects, and you're learning so much, and that kind of reminds you of something and so it's just this wonderful sharing of information, and I think that's probably why I'm so prolific in my work, is because I'm surrounded by other people who are creating, and every time I see them, I come away with these ideas of like, oh, I got this idea for this, or I really want to go do that. And it's wonderful. So I'm very honored to be surrounded by so many creative and passionate people, and I think that definitely is a help for me in my work as well.
I love that, Jim. It reminds me too. I'm a songwriter fan, and same thing. Anytime I have people over, they're like, anytime we talk about something, will be like, "There's a song in that. There's a song in that. There's a song in that." I'm like, it could be overly, but to your point, just in general, a gentle reminder to surround yourself with people that interest you, not that bog you down, guys. It's you can be the change.
Really quickly.
Exactly.
Really quickly, too, you got to promise us, if you ever make your way across over to here, either to the Nashville area, Franklin, or to the city of New Orleans, either one of us would be thrilled in a heartbeat to host you, hosting a game, or just hosting a great conversation. You're welcome back, as I say to the best of guests, anytime. Fen Inkwright has joined us this morning. By the way, guys, go to ROSDOTTIR.com.
And if that's hard to remember, go to our website because it's posted there as well.
Yeah, we got you taken care of. Go to radionemo.com and get it taken care of there. We can't thank you enough. Happiest of seasons. Hope the fall is enjoyable and have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful to talk to you.